Hi, welcome to the quiz. You can answer along on quizalto.com, all for free. The exact URL of this quiz will be in the notes down below. Let's get started. Good luck. What does AWS CodeDeploy allow you to do regarding failed deployments? Disable future deployments temporarily. Manually restart the deployment process. Notify via SMS messages. Automatically roll back to a previous version. AWS CodeDeploy allows automatic rollback to a previous version in case of failed deployments. What does the hooks section in an app spec file define? Load balancer configurations. Database schema changes. CloudFormation stack updates. Actions to execute at different stages of deployment. The hooks section in an app spec file defines actions or scripts to execute at different stages of the deployment process in AWS CodeDeploy. What does the traffic shift feature in AWS CodeDeploy allow you to do? Gradually direct traffic to a new version. Update IAM roles. Redirect DNS queries. Scale instances automatically. The traffic shift. Which AWS service does AWS CodeDeploy integrate with for automatic deployments based on GitHub commits? AWS CodePipeline. Amazon Redshift. AWS Glue. Amazon Kinesis. AWS CodeDeploy integrates with AWS CodePipeline to automate deployments based on source code changes in GitHub repositories. What is a deployment lifecycle event in AWS CodeDeploy? A CloudWatch metric. An Amazon S3 bucket. A stage in the deployment process triggering actions. An AWS Lambda function. A deployment lifecycle event in AWS CodeDeploy represents a stage or step in the deployment process that triggers specific actions or checks. What does AWS CodeDeploy use to authenticate and authorize deployments? SAML assertions. IAM roles and policies. Access keys and secret keys. OAuth tokens. AWS CodeDeploy uses IAM roles and policies to authenticate and authorize deployments. What does AWS CodeDeploy use to manage deployment permissions? AWS access keys. IAM roles and policies. SAML assertions. OAuth tokens. AWS CodeDeploy uses IAM roles and policies to manage deployment permissions securely. How does AWS CodeDeploy manage deployments to on-premises instances? Via AWS Lambda functions. Directly through AWS Management Console. Through an on-premises agent. Using Amazon ECS tasks. AWS CodeDeploy manages deployments to on-premises instances through an on-premises agent installed on the servers. Which of the following deployment configurations in AWS CodeDeploy allows deploying to a predefined set of instances? Auto-scaling. EC2/on-premises. Serverless. Fargate. The EC2/on-premises deployment configuration in AWS CodeDeploy allows targeting a specific set of EC2 instances or on-premises servers. What is the role of an application revision bundle in AWS CodeDeploy? Optimizes load balancer configurations. Manages instance backups. Monitors VPC traffic. Contains versioned application files. An application revision bundle in AWS CodeDeploy contains versioned application files prepared for deployment. What does AWS CodeDeploy use to define the sequence of deployment actions? Amazon CloudFront. AppSpec file. AWS Directory Service. IAM policies. AWS CodeDeploy uses an AppSpec file to define the sequence of deployment actions and configurations for application updates. What is the main benefit of using blue/green deployment with AWS CodeDeploy? Minimal downtime during updates. Faster deployment times. Improved security posture. Lower cost per deployment. Blue/green deployment minimizes downtime by using separate instances for new and old versions. Which deployment method in AWS CodeDeploy involves testing new versions on a small subset of instances first? Blue/green deployment. Canary deployment. All-at-once deployment. Rolling deployment. Canary deployment in AWS CodeDeploy allows testing new versions on a small subset of instances before rolling out to the entire fleet. What is AWS CodeDeploy primarily used for? Deploying applications to Amazon EC2 instances. Analyzing logs with Amazon CloudWatch. Sending emails through AWS SES. Managing Amazon S3 buckets. AWS CodeDeploy is a service for automating application deployments to a variety of compute services including Amazon EC2 instances. How does AWS CodeDeploy handle network interruptions during deployments? Pauses the deployment process. Automatically retries deployment actions. Rolls back to the previous version. Logs the interruptions for manual review. AWS CodeDeploy automatically retries deployment actions in case of network interruptions. Which AWS service can AWS CodeDeploy use for automatic scaling during deployments? Amazon SNS. AWS Auto Scaling. AWS Batch. AWS Step Functions. AWS CodeDeploy can integrate with AWS Auto Scaling to automatically adjust instance capacity based on deployment needs. What is the primary role of the deployment configuration in AWS CodeDeploy? Manages Amazon RDS databases. Configures Amazon ECS services. Optimizes CloudFront distributions. Defines deployment rules and options. The primary role of a deployment configuration in AWS CodeDeploy is to define deployment rules. What is the typical deployment flow in AWS CodeDeploy? Create deployment group. Register application. Deploy revision. Launch instances. Configure load balancers. What is an application ID in AWS CodeDeploy? Identifier for deployed applications. Secret access key for deployment. Amazon S3 bucket name. IAM role for deployment. An application ID in AWS CodeDeploy serves as an identifier for deployed applications. What is a deployment configuration in AWS CodeDeploy? Configures DNS settings. Specifies deployment rules and options. Manages IAM users. Updates EC2 instance types. A deployment configuration in AWS CodeDeploy specifies deployment rules. How does AWS CodeDeploy handle application deployment errors? By automatically rolling back to a previous version. By increasing instance capacity temporarily. By restarting the deployment process. By notifying via email alerts. AWS CodeDeploy handles deployment errors by automatically rolling back to a previous version if issues occur during deployment. What is a Lambda deployment in AWS CodeDeploy? Automating EC2 instance launches. Optimizing Amazon S3 storage. Managing RDS databases. Deploying code changes to AWS Lambda functions. A Lambda deployment in AWS CodeDeploy involves deploying code changes to AWS Lambda functions. What does AWS CodeDeploy use to verify successful deployments? Elastic load balancing metrics. Deployment status checks and health checks. AWS CloudTrail logs. Amazon RDS snapshots. AWS CodeDeploy verifies successful deployments using deployment status checks and health checks configured during deployment. What does an application revision represent in AWS CodeDeploy? A CloudFormation stack. An instance type for scaling. A version bundle of application files. A security group for EC2 instances. An application revision in AWS CodeDeploy is a snapshot or bundle of versioned application files ready for deployment. What is a best practice for managing deployment lifecycle hooks in AWS CodeDeploy? Apply hooks after deployment. Use different scripts for each deployment. Disable hooks for faster deployments. Ensure consistent scripts across environments. A best practice for managing deployment lifecycle hooks in AWS CodeDeploy is to ensure consistent scripts across environments. And that's a wrap. Thanks to everyone who participated. Remember, you can answer along on quizalto.com, where you can keep track of your progress and find much more quizzes. We hope you had a fun and challenging time. Until next time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel for more. Hit the bell icon to be notified as soon as we upload. Please leave a comment if you have any thoughts or suggestions, and, if you think this video is worth sharing with someone who could benefit from it, please forward a link to them. See you next time. Thanks for watching.